From the Late Homecomer, Guided Close Read. The word late homecomer comes from a German word used to describe Jews who returned from World War II concentration camps to homes that were no longer there. Yang felt the Hmong people were in a similar situation as refugees from China, Laos, and Thailand who hoped they had finally found a home in the United States. Authors use vivid language and imagery to help readers picture a scene. Imagery is a description that appeals to the senses of sight, sound, smell, feeling, or touch. These sensory images make a setting or scene more memorable for readers. Reread lines 9 through 15. Identify the sense or senses Yang's description appeals to. What is the effect of her description? Pause while you think. The description appeals to the sense of sight. Colors chipping, slopping porches, a small patch of green. The description emphasizes the family's economic situation. They have been looking for a house for 6 months, yet a house in this condition appeals to them. Yang's memoir is the true story of her life with a focus on her personal experiences and observations. To help readers understand, Yang often compares her life to familiar situations. Allusion is an indirect reference to a famous person, place, event, or literary work. Laura and Mary Ingalls were characters in The Little House in the Big Woods, a classic story about an American pioneer family. Reread lines 16 through 25. Examine Yang's comparison of her family's situation to that of a pioneer family. What does the comparison reveal about her? Pause while you think. She's excited about living in a house that belonged to storybooks. Yang is probably an avid reader. A simile is a comparison of two unlike things using the words like or as. Yang uses a familiar comparison to give readers a sense of the house's size. Reread lines 66 through 74. Identify the simile Yang uses to give a first view inside the house. What is the effect of her comparison? Pause while you think. Yang says that the entrance was small, like an elevator. It suggests a confined feeling, especially in light of the humongous homes mentioned in lines 43. Reread lines 92 and 93. Yang uses another simile to give readers a final impression of the house. What does this comparison suggest about the house? Pause while you think. Yang says that the house smells old, like thrift shops. The comparison reinforces the idea that the house is run down, used, and perhaps cheap. Repetition is the use of the same word or phrase more than once, and authors often do that to emphasize specific ideas. Reread lines 101 through 107. Identify a repeated word or phrase. What idea or feeling does the repetition emphasize? Pause while you think. Someday. The repetition causes a hopeful feeling. The family is moving to a rundown house in a poor neighborhood, but they have hope that their lives will improve someday. Notice Yang's efforts to fit into the world around her, despite the inner turmoil she's feeling. Reread lines 124 through 133. What does Yang mean when she says that she pushed against the skin that contained her? Pause while you think. She is growing and changing while still trying to maintain the life and relationships she has always known. In lines 154 through 162, notice Yang's hopes for the future. Reread lines 154 through 162. Notice Yang's hopes for the future. What does her statement that she and her sister wanted to make the lifelong journeys of our family worth something suggest about the views of their roles in the Hmong community? Pause while you think. They believe their success will reflect well on the entire Hmong community and make their family's struggles worthwhile. In a memoir, authors often compare themselves to others. While Yang has always compared herself to her older sister Dao, she begins to recognize her connection to a high school English teacher. Reread lines 163 through 172. What does Yang mean when she says that, in comparison to her sister, she was lost? Pause while you think. Dao is a good student who understands how to use what she learns, while Yang has difficulty expressing herself and connecting what she learns in school to real life. Remember earlier, the author made an allusion to the little house in the big woods. The author makes a second reference to works of literature in lines 174 and 175. Reread lines 171 through 193. What does the fact that Yang connects key events in her life to works of literature suggest about her? Pause while you think. It suggests that literature had a great impact on her as she was growing up. In this part of the memoir, Yang compares Shakespeare's classic love story to her own experiences and observations. Reread lines 199 to 216. Find language that shows Yang's parents persevering through hardships. Why does Yang believe that her parents are a better example of love than Romeo and Juliet? Pause while you think. Some possible answers. Possible answers. Might each have an easier one apart. Your children see you cry. Because long ago, when you were younger and you did not see so clearly, you had chosen them. Her parents stayed together even when their lives became difficult, something Romeo and Juliet never had the chance to do. Notice the explanatory footnote that follows line 285. Connect the Hmong's role in Vietnam conflict to their subsequent lives as refugees. Reread lines 275 to 285. What is the impact of Yang's metaphor about the lives lost during the Vietnam War? Pause while you think. The metaphor shows the suffering of the living as well as their sorrow for those who died. Immigrants wishing to become citizens of the United States must take a test. They must demonstrate the ability to read, write, and speak English, as well as have an understanding of important events in U.S. history. In some cases, the immigrants are granted a waiver to take the test in a language other than English. Reread lines 293 to 296. Notice the imagery Yang uses to describe her aunt and uncle's studying. What impression of them does Yang create? Pause while you think. Yang uses words such as hovered, French accent, and thick reading glasses to describe the sights and sounds of their studying process. The image she creates shows the intensity and urgency of their studying. The next part of the memoir, Yang compares her father's reaction to their situation to the feelings she has about their lives. Reread lines 338 through 350. Identify the difference in Yang's father's response as compared to her own. How is Yang's reaction also different from her earlier feelings about their house? Pause while you think. Yang's father expresses his sadness through his poetry and music, carried love songs about the falling apart of the country, and made music of the loneliness. Yang directs her anger at their living conditions. Could not see poetry in the mold that grew wild, and our house, so cute on the outside, rotted on the inside. Earlier, she saw the house as a sign of their success in America, while now it's just another element of their struggle. Notice Yang's vivid description of the onset of her illness. Reread lines 359 to 384. Identify words and phrases that help you to imagine what Yang is experiencing. What is the impact of similes such as felt like needles were twisting their way into my chest? Pause while you think. Phrases such as incapable of crying the pain away, eyes growing tight in the darkness, and all out of color and out of breath show what Yang is experiencing. Yang's words help readers imagine her pain and her desperation. Yang is comparing her illness to the history of the Hmong people. Reread lines 428 to 430. What does Yang's use of the word murky in line 429 suggest about the origins of the Hmong people? Pause while you think. It suggests that the origins of the Hmong people are unclear, that like Yang's illness, it is not known exactly where they began. A symbol is an object that stands for something beyond itself. The bracelet Grandma gives Yang becomes a symbol of the protection and healing that Grandma has not been able to provide. Reread lines 437 to 451. Notice Grandma's explanation of why she chose the elephant bracelet. How does Yang emphasize her own weakness in comparison to the powerful protection of the elephants? Pause while you think. Elephants protect their babies by forming a circle around them. You are sick, and I cannot protect you. The power of the elephants will protect you and make you well again. Yang notes that the bracelet had to be made smaller to fit her wrist. Yang compares her improving health to the weakening and eventual breaking of her bracelet. Reread lines 463 to 467. How do you know that the bracelet continues to be a symbol to Yang even after she begins to feel better? Pause while you think. She keeps the bracelet even after it breaks, and she promises herself that she will have it repaired or recreated.